All right. Well, I think I'll go ahead and get us started here. Thanks again, everyone, for coming out tonight. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. And be sure to check out our website, powells.com, to see what other upcoming virtual events we have. And make sure to follow us on social media as well, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Tonight, we're very excited to welcome Dave Zirin and Etan Thomas, one of Utne Reader's 50 visionaries who are changing our world. Dave Zirin is the sports editor of The Nation, a columnist for The Progressive, and the host of the Edge of Sports podcast. His many books include A People's History of Sports in the United States, Game Over, and Bad Sports. Zirin has also been a regular guest on MSNBC, CNN, and ESPN, to name a few networks. Zirin's newest work, The Kaepernick Effect, Taking a Knee, Changing the World, is a book about the politics of sport and the impact of sports on politics, and is for anyone seeking to understand an essential dimension of the new movement for racial justice in America. In 2016, amid an epidemic of police shootings of African Americans, celebrated NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick began a series of quiet protests on the field, refusing to stand during the US national anthem. By taking a knee, Kaepernick bravely joined a long tradition of American athletes making powerful political statements. This time, however, Kaepernick's simple act spread like wildfire through American society, becoming the preeminent symbol of resistance to America's persistent racial inequality. Zirin chronicles the Kaepernick effect for the first time through interviews with a broad cross-section of professional athletes across many different sports, college stars, and high-powered athletic directors and high school athletes and coaches. In each case, he uncovers the fascinating explanations and motivations behind a mass political movement in sports through deeply personal and inspiring accounts of risk-taking, activism, and courage, both on and off the field. Joining Zirin in conversation tonight is Etan Thomas. Thomas played in the NBA for 10 seasons.
11.
He's also 11 seasons, and he's the author of several books, including most recently in 2018, We Matter, Athletes and Activism. A senior writer for basketballnews.com, Thomas is the host of The Rematch. In addition, he writes for The Guardian, has previously written for The Washington Post, Huffington Post, CNN, ESPN, and can be seen on MSNBC as a special correspondent. He also co-hosts a weekly radio show, The Collision, where sports and politics collide. This evening's event will include an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you would also like to know the answer to, you can upvote that question by clicking the thumbs up button there. Most importantly, please consider supporting Dave and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his new book from us. A link to buy The Kaepernick Effect, as well as a link to buy Etan's books, will be shared in the chat a couple of times this evening. Dave, Etan, it's really great to have you. We're thrilled to be hosting you tonight.
Right on, Kevin.
Great. Well, Dave, I have so many questions that I want to ask you about this book. And it's a great book. I have it right here. I did receive my copy. It's a great book. And I want to start off really with, what really inspired you to write this book? I mean, because it took a different type of direction. When people look at the Kaepernick effect, they might think that this is really examining Colin Kaepernick. This is really praising Kaepernick, but it really isn't really about Kaepernick. It's more about the movement that he created. So talk to everybody about why you wanted to write this book.
Yeah, first and foremost, great to be here. Powell's legendary bookstore, Etan Thomas, someone who I believe is a legendary presence at this intersection of sports and politics. I mean, your work speaks for itself. And I was very influenced by your book, We Matter, Athletes and Activism, which centers the voices of people in the movement in a way that I found like different from the way I usually write, where I usually center my own voice. Like, it really made me curious about centering the voices of the people in the struggle. So thank you for that. I mean, the chain reaction is real. But let me start with somebody who we both know well, and that would be 1968 Olympian John Carlos, famously raised his fist on the medal stand, of course. I was having a discussion with John Carlos a couple of years ago, and Dr. John, or Los, looked at me and he said, you know, after we raised our fist in Mexico City, there were young people doing it all over the place. Football fields, track and field, people were just raising their fists. And I was like, oh my gosh, really? I didn't know that part of the story. I didn't know it spread down to the scholastic level. How do I find these people? It's been over 50 years, you know, lost to the wind. And it made me really think, though, about all of these stories that you and I have heard over the last 5 years of this high school, someone takes a knee, or that college, someone takes a knee, this soccer player, that football player, this cheerleader, you know, all of these sort of one-off stories that have been part of our atmosphere, you and I, as we look at sports and politics. And I was thinking, we got to do right by these young people the way we really should have done right by the young people in '68 who took inspiration from Smith and Carlos, and not let them get forgotten. Because we all know what history does. You know, it's like you extol Dr. King and forget about the thousands of people who built the movement. You raise up, you know, Tommy Smith and John Carlos as they should be raised up, but maybe you forget all the people who took inspiration and raised their fists too. And with this era, I didn't want it to just be like, oh, this is about one individual, Colin Kaepernick. No, it's about the effect that he had, you know, and that's the real power of what I think Colin Kaepernick has meant to the struggle, is that he gave this generation of athletes a method. He gave them like something they could do, a language by which they could show their discontent with racial inequity and police brutality. So that was the modest start to the book, just thinking like, I want to preserve these voices. I don't want them to get memory hold. I don't want the political teeth of this moment to get pulled out. But then that changed for me. Summer of 2020, the police murder of George Floyd. You get the largest demonstrations in the history of the United States. And I'm still working on the book at this point. And I'm like, whoa, I got to go back and call every single person who I interviewed the first time. So I make dozens of phone calls back to everybody. Hi, remember me? We had that 2-hour interview about really personal stuff that happened at a very vulnerable moment in your life. Oh, by the way, I also want to know what you think about the killing of this man and the fact that you have the largest demonstrations in the history of this country going on. What are your thoughts? And it was a little awkward at first because they were like, oh, you? But what was interesting was that all of them were engaged. All of them were part of the struggle. All of them saw themselves as organizers, you know, and they felt profoundly, in some cases they used the word vindicated, but in other ways they just said, you know what, we were on the right side of history then when we were isolated and all alone. And at this point, we now know we were on the right side of history because look at the people are coming up. And that's when I was like, oh my goodness, many roads may have led us to the summer of 2020, but one of them runs straight through the athletic fields of the United States. Right. And then that really became the point of the book, to be like, this isn't just something that happened because, you know, in a sports sense, but this is some world-changing stuff.
Right. Right. You know, I like the fact that you was examining a lot of the younger athletes, because a lot of times you heard a lot of media saying, well, they're just kind of copying what Colin Kaepernick is doing. They're just taking a knee because they see Colin. They just reduce them, like they don't have any kind of deeper reasoning. And you went a little bit deeper in all these specific cases. So let's start with Garfield High.
Yeah. I mean, first, just to say how much I agree with you about the dismissiveness of younger people and their own ability to draw political conclusions and then act on those conclusions. One of the people I interviewed, she said to me, you know, all the time adults say to me, oh, you kids, you're too apathetic. You just care about your phones. But then we do something and they get on us even worse. It's almost like the one thing worse than apathy is actually doing something. Right. And I thought that captured something, like that feeling that you exist between a rock and a hard place. And the adults are just not going to give you even half an inch to try to express yourself and have the space to grow, let alone the space to lead. And so I agree with you so strongly about the fact that, like, these young people, man, I mean, I think about that a lot. Like, you think about what, like, you know, my daughter's 17. I know, your son is about this almost the
16.
same. Yeah,
Yeah, 16.
and 16, and it's like you just I'm sometimes I have to check myself when I'm with her sometimes, because sometimes I'm actually in awe of all they've had to live through compared to what
Right,
I had to live through my first 16 years, and
right,
it's just like, wow, you've known nothing but a post 9/11 world. Wow, you've known nothing but war as a justification for just everyday life. I mean, these are heavy burdens, and let alone, when we talk about climate change, let alone we talk about, viral episodes of police violence, which can go
mhm,
downloaded into the brain right away, which is traumatic, and let alone obviously COVID. I mean, it's a lot that they
yeah,
deal
it's a
with,
lot.
and so it's like their ability to manage that is something that I've just got a lot of respect for. And everything they did in this athletic realm, like you asked about Garfield High School, I mean,
Mhm,
there's an example right there of everything that a community of struggle could look like. For folks who don't necessarily know, Garfield High School in Seattle is a pretty remarkable place. It's where Quincy Jones went to school. It's a public school. It's where Jimi Hendrix went to school. It's this incredible like center and fulcrum of Black culture, in a city with a very small Black population. And it's like this, so it's this incredibly special place. And
mhm,
a couple of members of the football team we're really thinking about, wow, this guy Kaepernick is kneeling. We're upset about some instances of police brutality in our community. Maybe we should kneel too. And it was really their coach, a guy by the name of Joey Thomas, who I spoke with for the book. And Joey Thomas said, okay, if you want to kneel, he got wind of it, and he said, let's make this a team conversation. So Coach Joey Thomas, he took, because you're a Coach Thomas, I got to be clear, Coach
right,
Joey Thomas, he took that role as an educator seriously. I mean, this is a high school football coach. And so they had a real discussion, not just about police violence, but about the anthem and what it means to them. And Francis Scott Key owning enslaved people, and the third verse that we never sing, and which justifies the killing of escaped enslaved people. And it's just this, they had just this very intense discussion. And when they were done, it was unanimous. They said, we're all going to take a knee. And they did. And you would think that they would be celebrated in the liberal city of Seattle for such an action.
right,
And I think they thought, from me talking to them, that the expectation would at the very least be, we hear what you're saying, like like or we can disagree without being disagreeable, like something in that nature. But
mhm,
instead, the coach Joey Thomas, he had the tires of his car slashed. Death threats were delivered to the school, death threats over social media to the students, and a real climate of, okay, we might need more police around the school. The incredible irony there, but that's what, like, the parents were getting nervous because of everything that was being built up. And it's just unbelievable to me too. It wasn't just like that kind of violence or that kind of backlash. There was also an administrative one where Coach Joey Thomas was pushed out of his job
mhm,
on incredibly spurious charges, and now he coaches in Florida. I mean, he was Seattle born and raised, and he's coaching in Florida. He had to leave Seattle effectively because of all of this. I mean, it's terrible. And it's interesting to me that there's a common thread with this and just about every story in the book. And that's that you have these young people, high school, college, pro, they are enacting in what is an explicitly peaceful act of civil disobedience.
mhm,
And the response is violence,
yeah,
either the threat of violence or actual violence. And I think it's an incredible microcosm of where we are as a country in 2021. I mean, this idea that you put forward a peaceful solution to what is a national crisis, and the response is, we don't like what you're saying, so we are going to hurt you for saying
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. And
I
it's so
ran through
ironic
all of
because,
it.
oh no, no, it's so ironic because all the time when you would see the uprisings after, a police officer killed someone and it went viral and things like that, what you heard was be more like Dr. King, do
Hmm.
more nonviolent protests. Why don't you try to do something like a sit-in? Why don't you do? And then you have these young people that did just that. I mean, what could be more peaceful than taking a knee? And then you still see the same response. There's another interesting story that I found in here was about Beaumont, Texas. It was interesting, because Beaumont, Texas, and people don't know Texas. Texas loves their football more than they love their oil. Like they love their football. And just tell the story about what happened, what they chose to do rather than support these young people.
Yeah, I mean Beaumont. They were called the Beaumont Bulls, and they were a youth team, a youth football team in the most football centric place in these United States, Texas. And there were people on the team. These teams, and Etan and I talk about this all the time. These teams are not living in this hermetically sealed bubble away from the world where they don't know what's happening. So these young folks, they're young, they're middle school kids, but they're very aware of like the viral videos of killings, of what happened. Excuse me, what happened to Michael Brown, what happened to Trayvon Martin. They're profoundly aware of the world that's going on around them, and they want to do something about it. So they talk to their coach, they talk to their parents, and they think taking a peaceful knee would be a great way to register for the community, just that they're aware of what's happening. And the response in Texas was not, wow, look at these politically engaged young people. Hey, let's hear what they have to say. It was to actually shut down the league,
The whole league.
team and the league. They went scorched earth. They just said, we're going to remove everything. I mean, think about that though, because that says something about, I guess, for lack of a better term, white fragility. I mean, this is Texas, and they would sooner have you not play football than say something about racism and police violence. I mean, that's wild. They said football is not as important as you not talking about things that make us uncomfortable. Wow, I guess something was more important than football. White fragility. Interesting.
Right.
It's amazing. And but this story actually has a happy ending. I mean, this is, one of the benefits of living in these social media times, is that this, which would have been a local story of a blip, actually, got some national coverage, and several NFL players, including local star here, Anquan Bolden, who's terrific on the Baltimore Ravens in his day, they wrote checks and they funded a new league for the kids. Now, that's not going to be a solution in every case by any stretch, but at least it was nice. Like when I interviewed the mother of one of the young people, and April, and she was amazing and open and talked about everything they went through. And there was this sense that when their league was saved by these NFL players, like that they were like connected to a movement much bigger than just themselves. So it wasn't even so much that they got to play again. I mean, they probably would have found a way to play somewhere else or somehow. It was much more that like, wow, we're part of something bigger than ourselves, because here are these NFL guys, and they're as clued into what we're doing as we were to what they were doing. And that's pretty neat.
It is. I want to ask you about another thing you covered in the book. And I was glad that you covered this right here in DC, Howard University cheerleader, Sydney Stallworth. And, sometimes the risks that especially the, our women athletes had to, go the extra limb of the level of backlash that they had to receive because of different disparities. So they have a different level of risk. But even going down to the cheerleader, section, and her bravery, and I'm glad you highlighted that. So talk about Sydney for a little while.
Yeah, Sid Stallworth was amazing to talk with, and I was thinking, like, her entire story, I don't think they would ever do it, but Howard University should excerpt it and put it in recruitment programs, because it's an interesting perspective, because a lot of the perspectives in the book are about Black students as being in some cases extreme minority in what are predominantly white institutions, or high schools or what have you. And they're taking a knee almost out of a sense of desperation, like, my God, like, hear what I'm saying, be uncomfortable. As one young woman said to me, like, be uncomfortable for 2 minutes as I am every day I have to come to this school, and in Sydney Stallworth's case, which I just found really interesting, is that because she was at Howard, first there were a lot of interesting dynamics at Howard. First there was the waiting to see if the football team would take a knee and wanting to support what they were doing, and then frustration at not seeing it emerge on the football team, and deciding that not only would they take a knee, but they would do so as leaders and do it in a way that both educated everybody on the team, but also they wanted to be like the face of the community, the face of Howard in DC, and that's how they saw themselves. And they said, as the face of Howard, we are going to take a knee right now. And then just about the support that was received on campus for what they did. And the people had their back. I mean, Sid Stallworth talked of even going into this coffee shop that I know this coffee shop, and they had her picture thumbtacked on the bulletin board. And the barista was like looking up at the picture and looking at Sid like, huh, you look like her. She's like, yeah, I guess I do. And that's why I said they should put it in their recruitment form, because it's like, this was the environment that she had, which is so markedly different than the experiences of a lot of other folks. It just seemed like the weight that she had to carry, that she felt like it was carried by a community, and she didn't just have to carry it herself. And there's something moving about that. I actually interviewed several cheerleaders in the book, and some of their stories, don't turn out as nicely as Sid's story, like including getting forced off the squad, getting forced out the school. I mean, so it's a diversity of experiences in this country for sure. Someone told me that I should have called the book "What to Expect When You're Protesting," and sort of like what to expect when you're expecting, because you've got like all these different scenarios. Like, what do you do if the coach doesn't want to listen to you? What do you do if the coach does listen to you? What do you do if your teammates have your back? What do you do if they stab you in the back? And you've got all these different twists and turns that can happen when you take that knee. The knee is only the start of each story. Like, the knee is only where it begins. It's like everything after that to me, as a writer, that I was clued into.
It's interesting because you have the different instances where sometimes they did it as a team, and then sometimes they were kind of like on an island by themselves. Can you compare the differences of how it turned out when they did it collectively versus when they were kind of by themselves?
I once had this amazing former Baltimore Colt player who we should get on the radio show sometime, named Joe Ehrman, who does this thing called the Positive Coaching Alliance. And Joe has this line that he says there are two kinds of coaches: the transactional and the transformational. The transactional is in it for how it makes them feel. The transformational is in it for how it actually grows the children themselves. And when you had cases in the book, when people read it, you'll see when you have transformational coaches, it usually means that most or all of the team is a part of the process. And that doesn't mean everybody takes a knee, but everybody's part of a conversation where everything is out on the table. And the discussion is had maturely, and the discussion is had politically, and it's facilitated by a coach who takes seriously his or her role as an educator. When you have situations like that, it tends to turn out much better for the young people, because they feel, if not a sense of even full solidarity and support, at least they definitely feel like their coach has their back. And you know more than anyone that that's sometimes the most important thing, just to know you've got that respect from your coach. And it also means that you know where everybody stands. What's that?
Right.
Yeah.
Ask Ben Simmons how important that is.
Yeah, we can ask Ben Simmons. And if people have any questions about Ben Simmons, please put them in the chat. But so So there's that aspect of it for sure. And in cases where people were sort of left out alone on the island by their coach, Ben Simmons style,
Yeah.
it was just very
Right.
painful. It was painful. And it's funny, like Etan and I are joking about holding out Philadelphia 76er guard Ben Simmons. But it is funny, like how universal, like I think people understand that. Like I've had this experience. Like if you've ever had um, a coach who didn't believe in you, like some of these kids who took a knee had a coach who didn't believe in them, like that, and what Ben Simmons is going through. I mean, please tell me if you disagree, but I feel like there's like a connective thread there, like just that feeling of I'm on a team and you keep telling me we're a family, but then this happens.
Right.
Family only goes
By
so
myself.
yes, by myself.
Right.
Like a very
By myself.
by myself. Well, a very
So
lonely.
do you think yes. Do you think that Kaepernick had any idea that he would have this grave effect for
Mm.
generations to come? In your mind, do you think that because I think that he knows that it's not, all about him, but it's the effect that he has, the way that he's inspired young people, and athletes, professional athletes moving forward. Do you think that he even knew that he was going to have this level of effect?
Not even close. I think
Right.
he had absolutely no idea. And this is it. The proof is all there in front of us. It's like, what do we know? We know that Colin Kaepernick first sat for the anthem in August of 2016, didn't take the knee until a couple of weeks
Mhm.
later. We know that he did not send out a press release. He did not send out a tweet. He did not alert any reporter that he was going to do it, which is why the only footage that exists of him sitting during the anthem, which he does, by the way, behind all his teammates, is like grainy security
Mhm.
camera. Like there's no dope, iconic picture of the first time Colin Kaepernick sat during the anthem because no one knew it was going to happen.
Right.
So it's just, if you see, there's one photo that's like grainy from behind, from a distance. And if it wasn't for one reporter who I interviewed for the book, Steve Weish, seeing that Kaepernick was sitting and having followed Kaepernick's social medias and having known him since he was in college, like Steve told me, like, yeah, we just one of those kids I liked a lot when he was in school, and just like stayed connected with him as he became this grown man in the NFL. And if it wasn't for Steve seeing that, it might actually have been, I truly believe this, a 1 week thing. It might have been something that he did that week out of because he was extremely frustrated and upset about the killings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. And maybe it wouldn't have been a 1 week thing. I don't know. But the point is that there wasn't a plan at that point. It was only when Steve Weish went to Colin and said, why did you do this? And Colin just went off. He said, bodies in the streets, police getting away with murder, that it became like this huge firestorm. And then it was only, I know this a ton, but the famous story of, there's this firestorm about him sitting during the anthem and all the rest of it, and everybody's losing their crap. And we should talk about that too, because I have a theory about that. But they're losing their crap. And then he has a conversation with former Green Beret and NFL player Nate Boyer. And they make the decision together that if Colin Kaepernick takes a knee instead of sits, and he does it in front of his team instead of behind his team, then it will look more respectful, and it will quiet down all the people who are saying, this is anti-military, this is anti-patriotic, this is anti-American, because they'll see that he's looking respectful by taking a knee. That was a bit of a miscalculation. When he took the knee, it obviously immediately everything went through the roof in terms of the iconography of it. It was on the cover of Time magazine, and it gave that lesson, if you will, to the like hundreds and thousands of young athletes who were looking at what Colin Kaepernick was doing and saying, oh, I'm also upset about racism and police killings. I can do that. And it just grew. It was a perfect storm, because I also believe this, and maybe you disagree. I'd be curious if you did disagree. I also believe that if the NFL had responded to Colin Kaepernick doing this by saying, we absolutely support the right of any player to express themselves politically however they want. This is a serious issue, and we appreciate Mr. Kaepernick's desire to start a national discussion. This also might have been a very different story, because one of the things that fueled it was just the endless repression from his own employers that, of course, ended up with him being, as you so correctly put it, whiteballed from the league after that season. But it's like, but their anger was, I don't think it's because Jerry Jones doesn't want to have a national discussion about qualified immunity in the police. Like, I think it's because the NFL depends on a labor and racial discipline that Colin Kaepernick, by taking that knee, was defying. And I think that in and of itself was terrifying to the people who actually profit from the product.
I think that one of the interesting parallels from a lot of the young people that you covered is that they experienced a lot of the similarities in the reactions that Colin Kaepernick experienced, in that they misrepresented what they specifically and clearly said was their reasons for taking a knee. So a lot of these people talk to the local media, they talk to school officials. Why are you doing this? This is why we're doing this. And then just going back to Colin Kaepernick, when you having the interview that you're talking about, when Steve Weiss asked him, and he said specifically, it's racism, it's police brutality, it's the political process. He laid out specifically why he was taking a knee. And then as soon as he finished, the same way, as soon as the young people in the book finished, they immediately said, well, it's anti-military, anti-veteran, and it's like, you didn't listen to anything that they said. And I thought that was interesting because they experienced the exact same response or misrepresentation to what they very intelligently articulated was their reasoning for taking a knee. I thought that was very interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's remarkable. I think one of the things we forget about that period in 2016 and 2017 is how many professional athletes and former professional athletes, and of course you are one of these folks. I'm also thinking about people like Doug Baldwin and Michael Bennett for the Seahawks, like just straight up, like just going on places like CNN and being remarkable polemicists on the question of police reform, and really directing and steering the discussion exactly where it needed to go, and directly saying what you just said here about, don't turn this into a debate on your terms that only serves to demonize people who are protesting. I mean, because let's be honest, they don't want to have some debate about what is patriotism. They don't want to have some debate about how you best support the military. Like here, they're like, military, yay. And then, let's throw them in Afghanistan another 5 years. It's like they don't care. But what they do care about is this idea of the people who are supposed to shut up and play, shutting up and play. There's this line I found that I used in the book. I'd used it in other stuff, so it wasn't like I discovered it because I'd used this quote before. But Floyd Patterson, the great boxer, who, remember, was Muhammad Ali's arch nemesis, and Muhammad Ali just made life very difficult for Floyd Patterson in the ring and outside the ring. But when Muhammad Ali's title was taken away for opposing the draft and the Vietnam War, Floyd Patterson said he's being made to pay too stiff a price, and the only reason they're making him pay it is because he can he can influence the working class people who follow boxing. And there's an element of that here where there's fear of how the platform can be used, and fear of the incredible, like no other sport, racial contradictions that exist in football. The contradictions of, like Michael Bennett said, he said, this sport is segregated, not integrated, because it's segregated between those of us who play and sacrifice our bodies and the people who own the franchises and stay for decades on end while we're gone after 3 years. And that's a pretty intense contradiction that they're able to keep in line because of non-guaranteed contracts and the typical career only being 3 years. That's how they're able to really put a top on the pot as it's starting to steam, But what Colin Kaepernick did, that it immediately makes them think of the sweater with the string on it, and that this is just going to pull a string on the entire operation. It's like he's talking about racism and police violence. We need to figure out a way how to reframe this immediately away from anything that has to do with questions of racism, and make it about the troops, and make it
Right.
about, and we'll make sure we have, and they did this, a Marine who is Black American standing behind Colin Kaepernick the next time he kneels. So that could be the photo image. So all the very intelligent people in the New York Times can say, oh, look at that, the irony.
Right.
So
But
that's, yeah.
and I want to say, I know we got to open it up for questions here in a little while. But I want to say this though, that one thing that your book brilliantly does is it illustrates and displays the brilliance of these young athletes
Mm-hmm.
and the fearlessness of these young athletes. And when you hear them speaking and you hear them articulating their reasonings for wanting to make a difference, you see the leaders in these young athletes, and they're so young and they're so aware, and they're inspiring to their peers. And these are young athletes that are 14, 15, 16 years old. And you hear them speaking with such eloquence and such, preciseness, and what they're dissecting of what is going on in their particular city. So there's not so much as a global or like a nationwide, but particularly their particular city, this
Yep.
specific case with this specific police officer and this specific, they're really in tune to their, and that's, it's so inspiring seeing the young people, and their courage and their bravery and the way that they're going to inspire each other. I think that's great, the way that this book really illustrated that. And young people reading this, I think it should be kind of required reading for all young people, because they find inspiration in each other. So they'll be looking at these young people telling their stories. Some ended up good, some ended up bad. You know what I mean? And they'll say, okay, well, this is the way we should do it here, and we should all do it collectively. So we're not on the island alone, like some of the people in the book were, and how it ended up. So I just think this was a great idea to put this together like this, and it's really going to go over well and inspire a lot of people.
Yeah, and I'm already in absolute just a state of humble joy about the fact that this organization in DC called Serve Your City, they got their mutual aid group that works with kids. They bought 500 copies and are giving like 500 away. They're putting them in
Great.
backpacks for the young people. And I said I was going to give whatever I make from the book, I'm going to give it to Serve Your City so they can keep doing their work. And and someone asked me, well, why do you do that? Why would you give away what you make from the book? And I said, honestly, it's not just because I like Serve Your City. It's because all these young people showed so much courage. And the point for me is, as a journalist, is not to profit from their courage, but to try to figure out how to pay it forward. So a new generation, so we could reseed the ground, and a new generation can rise up that's even makes this generation look too slow. Because I think that's the trajectory we're on. I mean, it's Mitch McConnell's America versus Trayvon Martin's America, and that's what the future is gonna, I think, portend for us.
Yeah, two very different Americas. Okay, so we need to direct all the people who want to ask questions to the chat room. So if you do have a question, please put it in the chat room, and we'll do our best to try to read the questions, and Dave can answer them as they come in. So we have a first one. Dave, if you want to read that one from Maria Johnson.
Okay, let me see. So you're in the. Let me see. I'm you're in the chat. Okay. All right, I got you. Marie Johnson said the Parkland students who decided that guns in schools had to be addressed after the horrific shooting and killing of their classmates. Those young people have also received death threats as well as criticism of their mission from conservative media. It seems to me that we are a more violent society overall. Some think that football is a violent sport and one which isn't concerned about their own players' safety until enough pressure is applied. That may be that violent sport is it maybe that violent sport is contributing to our violence? Your thoughts? Yeah, the only thing I would say, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, just what you're saying about the Parkland students, I think, yeah, that's a good parallel to draw, because it's that idea, once again, of people trying to present a political solution for a very real crisis in their lives. And the response not being, okay, let's debate it, let's discuss it. It comes with violence as a response. And I think we need to recognize that as an affliction of our society. And it's so ridiculous when people say, like, oh, look at the left, cancel culture here, cancel culture there. It's like, hello, these young people are trying to have a debate, and people are responding by threatening their siblings. And this one person I interviewed, Rodney Axon, he talked about, after he took a knee, having to walk his elementary school age sister to the schoolhouse every day. Think about that as an older brother, to feel like that, as a teenager, to feel that level of personal responsibility and that level of what has to be called fear, for your own family and for the people you love. Now, as for, I think, obviously, violence has existed in society long before football, not to be glib about that. But I think that certainly the sports that are popular in our society certainly reflect a general mood in our society. And I think it says a lot that football is the closest thing to a national language that we have in this country, and that the rest of the world doesn't really give a damn about it. I just think that says a lot about America relative to the rest of the world.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. Rolla Lewis. Oh, highlighting the local is brilliant. To serve your city, have a website that young advocates can consult and share. Yeah, serveyourcitydc.org. Folks should check it out. Serveyourcitydc.org. It's a mutual aid society. The work they did during the first months of the pandemic, beyond brilliant. Helping young kids, young at-risk kids, get ready for online school. I mean, awe-inspiring work. And it's like when I had this thought of, I want to pay forward whatever I get from the book, I mean, this was the first and last place I thought about. And I just was like, got in touch with Maurice Cook, the director, right away. And it was good. Okay, this is interesting. This is a great question. They're all interesting. I'm not saying one isn't interesting, but this caught me, because anytime you put Ali in a question, you're going to make my sensors go up, My hair will go up like Beaker on the Muppets. I'll be like, oh, Muhammad Ali. All right. Etan said young activists are often told, be like Dr. King, and then they are immediately vilified for doing exactly that. The other criticism is that it's not the right time for protest. Another aspect of Dr. King is that he was hated by a majority of Americans for years, but then time goes by and King's beliefs are watered down and his socialist and anti-military opinions are erased, and he's not around to speak out. He's celebrated as an American hero. The same thing happened with Muhammad Ali. Do you think it's possible that Colin Kaepernick might, in 20 to 25 years, be considered by the U.S. mainstream as a brave hero for justice?
Great question.
I want you to answer that.
I mean, answer it? Okay, I can answer that. I mean,
I'm like, that question's got my mind spinning. Oh my goodness.
I mean, all we have to do is look at Muhammad Ali and see how he is embraced. My grandfather used to always tell me about Muhammad Ali, and we would have conversations, and he would say, the way that he is being embraced now isn't the way he was embraced when he joined the Nation of Islam, when he was hanging with Malcolm X, when he said he wasn't going to go to the war, when he said he was public enemy number one. And then to see years later statues and monuments and mainstream America praising him. And yeah, I think that that's going to happen with Colin Kaepernick as well down the line. And then we'll be here, like my grandfather was like, wait a minute, that's not how y'all treated him when he was here. And we'll be saying the same exact thing about Colin Kaepernick. That's my prediction.
Jamel Hill said that the NFL in 20 years would have an award called the Colin Kaepernick Justice Award.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. And we will all laugh.
Look, they were shameless enough to sit down with Jay-Z, and I'll never forget that, man. I will never forget that. That's might be for another conversation for another time. It's just All right. Eric Burrian asks, your work decenters Kaepernick and your own voice. Would you consider archiving primary sources, e.g. the interviews, your research notes, etc., so that future historians who will no doubt investigate additional sources may examine the kneelers still further? I've never thought of that. Maybe. That would be interesting to do. Obviously I've kept everything. So it would all depend. As I think about it and as I'm processing it, I would actually probably only do that if I had express written consent from every single person I talk to. They've trusted me with a lot, and if they want their voice to live on like that, I think they should have self-determination over that.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah. Next question. Do the billionaire owners want these protests and discussions to just go away? Or is there a political aspect to their opposition to protests too? Wow, that's some three-dimensional chess right there.
Yeah, good question.
From Brian Canny. That is some three-dimensional chess. All right. Do I think that billionaire owners want these protests and discussions to just go away? Yes. Do I think many of them are part of a political project that has been thrilled to be able to scapegoat and use folks like Colin Kaepernick for their own ends? Yes. I think both things can be true. I think their Shangri-La would be just the trains running on time and just, being able to cash in. But I also think that they have their own sort of independent political project that's connected to their business, but also independent of their business, where when these athletes actually try to be heard, they see a political benefit in trying to smack them down. And that would be my take on that.
And that's fair. But I think also you have to always throw in the difference between the NBA and the NFL.
Yeah, I was thinking of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to always, because they are kind of two different fan bases, two different political, I wouldn't necessarily even say political ties, but playing to different political audiences. I'll say that. It seems. So that's what I would say. There's definitely a difference. Go ahead. Go to the next question.
Yeah, you just said something though that was that was really right on though. About, because there's the third way too. I'm sorry to roll back on this question, but there's wanting the discussions to go away so the trains can run on time. There's not minding the discussions because you can use them for your own political ends. Then there's the third way, which I would argue some leagues have tried to do, which is like you see these discussions as perhaps profitable as a way to reach a young generation. And so you start, looking at the landscape of this country and seeing this young generation is more demographically diverse and less tolerant of intolerance than any generation in the history of this country. And they say to themselves, oh, maybe we could be the league that's, stands for social justice, and that could attract people. I think that's got to be part of it. Okay. How do you see the way the San Francisco 49ers treated Cap? Do you see how he changed after Harbaugh left? And where do you think he became radicalized? He has become bigger than the game. Well, first and foremost, yeah, San Francisco 49ers did terribly by Colin Kaepernick. He was a brilliant Super Bowl quarterback under Jim Harbaugh. And then they had a coach after him named Jim Tomsula, who was utterly unqualified, has never worked as a head coach since in the NFL. And then Colin Kaepernick was hurt the year after that. Chip Kelly, Colin Kaepernick hurt. So he has 3 coaches in 3 years. And he definitely needed a change of scenery. I think he should have been a starter for any one of 16 other NFL franchises. That should have been like a big NFL mega trade. The 49ers trade Cap. I mean, that would have been front page news. And they've tried to make him seem like he was somehow like on the downward slope of his career and all this stuff. There's been a lot of post-Cap propaganda that ignores the fact that the last year he actually did play in 2016, he was great. He started 12 games, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, led the league in yards per carry. I mean, the idea that someone like that wouldn't find work says something very damning about the National Football League. Where do I think he became radicalized? I think the world has a radicalizing effect on all of us, is what I think.
Very good answer. That's a good answer.
Yeah,
Very good answer.
I think by being human and having open eyes. Um,
Mhm.
and here is a question from Spencer Harris. What are your thoughts on pro sports leagues integrating demonstrations into the sporting spectacle, like taking the knee before kickoff in the English Premier League? See, this is interesting, Etan, because I was just interviewed by this newspaper, the Irish Times, and big shock, it's in Ireland, and I said something dismissive about these kinds of team take a knee activities. I
Okay.
was like, I sort of harumphed at it as like, very different from the people that I profile in the book. They were doing it without sanction from any larger force that was going to protect them. They were taking a risk, basically. By everyone in the stories that I tell are taking a risk, and English Premier League players are doing it as a team activity. And the Irish reporter pushed back on me and said that I was wrong to be so dismissive of the soccer players taking the knee, because there's so much racism in English Premier League soccer that just having this act puts it right in the face of the fans, and has served to, in a very good way, polarize between fans who are willing to listen and think about it and those who aren't. So he was telling me that the very specific way that soccer operates there makes any anti-racist gesture something to be welcomed. I was curious what your thoughts were about that. What do you think about the team activity thing?
Well, I think that when you look at it in a way, like I want to use the WNBA as an example, and then I think that should be the model of how you can effectively change your employer stance when you do things collectively. So when the WNBA first, did their protests, the WNBA president said, if anybody does this again, you'll be fined and
Mm-hmm.
possibly suspended. And that's when a few did it, right? So then the whole league did it together. And then it was so funny. I wish we could like almost screenshot it and see they flipped their entire. The WNBA is we support our players using their voices. I was like, wow, just 48 hours earlier, you said that you was going to suspend anybody who did it again, and so that you kind of force their hand to have no choice but to accept it when everybody does it together. And then they just kept doing it, and they kept their same program the WNBA did, to where you see in the wobble, what they call the bubble, you saw the WNBA all taking a knee before. They were playing montages of different victims of police brutality. They were doing all these different things. I don't look at it as them. I look at it as the players forcing their hand to take part in something that they really would have rather not take part in the first place. But since
Mm-hmm.
the players did it collectively, that the WNBA had no choice. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, and then they messed around and flipped the Senate. They flipped the whole
Right, right.
Senate.
Yes, they did.
And that's a story people will be talking about for a long time.
That's
We
right.
got time for one more question.
Yeah,
What do you
well,
think, Don?
let's squeeze in one.
We'll squeeze in one last quick one.
All right,
Oh,
cool.
not so quick, but we'll do our best. After
Okay.
George Allen asks, after George Floyd was murdered last summer, many athletes took a knee before basketball and baseball games. Many sports writers said sports had changed forever, but those actions lasted a relatively short time. I don't think anyone in Major League Baseball is doing it now. Do you think those actions were more of the moment? And I say no. These things operate on continuums, and they will have small ups and downs. You have to look at what the overarching arch. I was trying to think of a better way to say that, but the overarching arch of where things are going is far more important than checking the ESPN.com to see if a player kneeled today or kneeled yesterday or whatever. That's not how you judge this. You judge this by the tenor of the moment. And even though in 2021 there's been an effort to try to go back to business and fans are back in the stadium and all right, let's all shut up and play, everybody, you still feel it. when you talk to athletes that, 2020 was like wine pouring out of a bottle and you can't pour the wine back in. It's like people know that they now have a place where they can speak out about a world that doesn't satisfy the needs of the vast majority of people. And that's a platform that they built, that wasn't given to them, but something that they earned. And that consciousness shift is something that isn't going anywhere.
Very well said. That was perfect.
Oh, right on. Well,
Perfect.
I guess we'll call on Kevin then. And
All right, great show, you guys. Lots of questions, lots of questions to be answered. I would direct people to Dave's book to find some of those answers. I'm going to put in the chat now the link to our YouTube channel. This event will be showing up on our YouTube page tomorrow, probably in the afternoon. So if you have some friends that missed it and you want to share it with them, feel free to click on that link and check it out tomorrow. And then also, I want to make sure to put the link in one more time for Dave's book, The Kaepernick Effect. Etan, Dave, it was really a great event. Pleasure to listen to your thoughts and to learn more about this book. So thanks for
thank you.
being with us.
If I could just real quick, a huge thank you to Etan Thomas for taking time out of his evening to do this. It's 8 to 9 p.m. here. I just really, really appreciate it. And a huge thank you to Powell's Books, which I think is like one of the great indispensable spaces in the United States.
Thank you very much. All right, everyone, have a good night and we'll see you next time.